Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. Such a pleasure to have all of you with us this evening. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. And tonight I'm joined with my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Happy to be with all of you this evening.
And we are so happy that you've taken the time to join us on this Tuesday, December 5th. If you are new to Live with the Louhs, it is a show that we hope and we pray that merges both faith and psychology to kind of give you some practical principles that you can apply in your everyday life. So again, welcome to Live with the Louhs. You know, before we dive into tonight's really exciting topic, in fact, it's a topic that we have never covered here on our show, which we're really excited about. But before I get to that, I do want to invite all of you to stay connected to us through our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs, and that last name is spelled L-O-U-H-S. In fact, all of our sermons are archived, as well as all of our daily messages and just videos that we've done are all on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in finding out more or listening to some of the sermons that we oftentimes collaborate on, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the Louhs YouTube channel. Again, that last name is L-O-U-H-S. And also, if you're interested in receiving our daily inspirational messages, I know many of you already receive them, and if you find them beneficial, share them with your friends and family. But if you've never received them, basically we send out these inspirational messages. They're very short reads that you can read every single day. We send to your email inbox at 7 a.m. Eastern Time every day. You can subscribe to them by going to thelouhs.com. That's our website, thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and all you will receive from us is simply the daily inspirational message that we like to provide for you every day. And on our Louhs website, we have all the different information about our upcoming speaking engagements, or how, if you'd like for us to come speak to your community or your church or a business, please, you can hear from you, especially in these meetings that we have, these shows that we have. And so we invite you to call us this evening at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or email me during the live broadcast of our show by emailing me at ask, that's A-S-K, at ancientfaith.com. That's ask at ancientfaith.com. So friends, let's get started. You know, according to the National Center for Learning Disabilities, listen to this study. Almost 15% of the U.S. population has some form of a learning disability. And for many of these people, they've been diagnosed with what is called ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. So let me just share with you how it impacts many of our children. In fact, ages 3 to 17, the most recent statistics that we found were that almost 6 million people, almost 10% of our children that are that age, are impacted by ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And boys are typically 13% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, which are only about 6%. But the reality is that we have adults that also struggle with this. And for many of these people, sadly, they can struggle with this challenge, and they can feel that the most routine tasks that are there can be difficult for them, forcing them to adapt based on their abilities. And for many of those who struggle, to make matters worse, it could be a label on them. Sometimes it's a label of shame or inadequacy or just the inability to learn, which also cascades into other areas of their life, also adding a level of stress in their life. So what do we all need to know about ADHD? We hear this so often. So oftentimes at times maybe even misused to diagnose what people think are a potential learning disability. How does it impact people on a day-to-day basis, including in our worship? And how can we be better informed to help people who are experiencing or go through ADHD? Here to join us this evening is a special guest. His name is Joel Klepak. Joel is a marriage and family therapist who's been working in college counseling centers in central Kentucky and teaches as an adjunct instructor, a professor in the MA in counseling program at Asbury Theological Seminary. He also worked in community mental health centers, a state psychiatric hospital, and a detention center providing psychotherapy and skills training. He also has led workshops on appropriate empathy, honesty, and collaboration within the church and at the annual OCamper conference. And you've heard many of our guests who have been from the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. Joel is from there as well. He became Eastern Orthodox while living and working in Romania for 8.5 years and has been on the parish council at St. Andrew Antiochian Orthodox Church in Lexington, Kentucky, where he sings in their choir. He has recently written a book incorporating internal family systems therapy, spirituality, and a memoir of his time in Romania called Miserere Me, A Journey of Self-Discovery Through, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but probably not, A Journey of Self-Discovery Through the Art of George Runal. And he has 3 children and his wife, Monica. Joel, it's such an honor and privilege to have you here with us. Welcome to Live with the Louhs.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you all.
So, Joel, I think for so many people, the question is really, what is ADHD? Can we just talk simply about kind of maybe clearing up any misconceptions and defining what that is?
Yeah. So I like to pause for a second before going into a list of what ADHD is to say that any diagnosis really is a list of symptoms. Mm-hmm. And it's put together in these labels kind of make sense of a cluster of symptoms. And so at the end of the day, really, we're dealing with a cluster of symptoms that make sense under this umbrella of ADHD, but we are so much more than a diagnosis and so mm-hmm. much more than a cluster of symptoms. So, but what we find in ADHD, it's struggles with executive functioning, and that is like trying to complete tasks, trying to get things done. That can be scheduling, planning, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Often we find inattention, hyperactivity, struggle with setting and completing goals, those kinds of things. When I work in a college setting with college students, and one of the things I'll ask if I'm starting to suspect ADHD, I'll ask them, how is it for you to write papers? And almost inevitably, if they have ADHD, they really, really hate writing papers. Because writing a paper involves so many different executive functioning steps in order to complete that project that it is sort of a kryptonite for someone with ADHD. And so that's just sort of an example, like completing bigger projects, especially boring projects or not exciting projects are part of that. I also like to think about like what are some of the upsides of ADHD, especially when I'm starting to suspect that. One of those is what we call hyperfocus or the deep dive. And it's also a struggle. But what we find is people with ADHD have an amazing ability to go deep. And that going deep comes in 2 times. When they're in crisis. So for college students, when the paper is due tomorrow, all of a sudden they are able to focus and do this deep dive and actually do pretty good work. And they may complete it at 5 a.m, but they've actually focused so hard on it that they've actually been able to show what they can do. Now that becomes a problem when there's 3 papers due on one day, where in college, sometimes that becomes a problem. The other time when ADHD becomes a superpower is when somebody is super interested. Now, I have some qualities of ADHD, and my wife will say, Joel is either totally disinterested or totally obsessed. And that kind of describes ADHD. And it really kind of becomes a superpower when you can get into a field or an area that you're really interested in. And I will tell students, college students with ADHD, that you don't have the luxury to choose a boring major. Mm-hmm. Like, you really need to do something that you love, that you're passionate about, and then you can do about whatever you want. Then we'll work on those struggles of executive functioning and getting projects complete. Mm-hmm. But if they're excited about the subject, they can get into that hyper-focus area. The other big strength of ADHD is, in school, we call it scattered attention, and it becomes a problem when we're trying to get students to focus. The flip side of that is ADHD brain kind of seeks novelty, seeks interesting new things. So I will talk to students about, like, when you're doing a group project, your time to shine is when your group's trying to figure out what the topic should be. Because that ADHD student is going to find some really interesting, creative topics that nobody else is going to think of. Now, deciding which of the 10 topics to do, they'll be terrible at that.
Right.
So let somebody else in the group decide that, but let those ADHD students thrive. Another place I've seen it show up is I had a student who was in the orchestra. And I told her about how the ADHD brain really is almost geared faster than normal. There's actually a nice podcast on ADHD called Faster Than Normal. And it's almost like it's craving more input than normal. And so I didn't tell her this, but the next week she came back and said, I tried that thing and I didn't take my medicine before orchestra. And the orchestra was amazing. When I wasn't on my medicine, I was able to hear every instrument in fine detail and hold it all together. It was like, that's what her brain craved, was that much input. Now, the problem is when life isn't giving you that kind of input and it's not as interesting or exciting, and then it's hard to keep your attention. Sure. So there's kind of plus sides of it and sides of it that are struggles. So.
What would you say is the difference, though, between, autism or dyslexia and that of ADHD? Can you explain those differences?
Yeah, so autism spectrum and dyslexia seem to be more of a kind of what we would call a neurodiversity. And those neurodiversities seem to be there for the advantages that they bring. And so there's a researcher out of the University of Louisville who was studying the autism spectrum brain and found a certain configuration within this brain structure. And he found that the exact opposite was true of dyslexic brains. Oh. And the autism brain seems to prioritize the details over the big picture. And that shows up in this superpower of being able to go deeply into one subject area. And you'll see some stereotypes of autism spectrum disorder, but that really is a big piece of it. And the dyslexia side is this bias towards seeing the big picture. And so that's, Einstein was probably dyslexic. He could sort of see the whole universe and all its dynamic moving parts. But he really struggled to do any computational math. He let other people do that. He said life's too short to do the math problems. But he could see the universe and all its complexities from his sort of dyslexic brain bias. So in that, it really feels like the autism spectrum brain and the dyslexic brain are really sort of, it's sort of like a car that, I don't know, a sports car that's geared to go really, really fast, right? It's amazing on the Autobahn, but put it in Atlanta traffic and it's a nightmare.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
or being really tall is, it's a superpower on the basketball court, but get in an airplane and it's awful.
It's a problem. Exactly.
Right. Whereas ADHD really seems to have a little bit more of a historical piece to it. Uh-huh. And the ADHD symptoms are both a solution and a struggle. So we can talk more about that. But ADHD is considered a little bit differently in the diagnostic manual than autism spectrum and dyslexia. And in some ways, it's a little bit more changeable too. Somebody who has dyslexia is probably not gonna change their overall ability to read.
I think it's beautiful too, Joel. What you're sharing is that, oftentimes we look at these as deficits or some sort of a struggle, but we also see this beautiful side of where they almost have this extraordinary gift, whether that may not be in the details, but maybe in the macro, in the larger part of it. We oftentimes talk. Roxanne and I talk about this. Is that just as a person, I'm much more the visionary. Even when we're talking about our ministry together. And she's definitely, though, the much more the detail person. I get lost in the details, but the macro part of it, I think is. I think I love the fact that there is this, that some may call ADHD a deficit, while others, I would argue that there's some beauty and the power that they have to do certain tasks that other people who don't have ADHD are probably not as able to do. So if you're new to or just listening to our show tonight, we're talking about, in fact, the title of tonight's show is Celebrating and Supporting ADHD Members of Our Families and Our Churches. If you or someone that you know has ADHD or have a question for Joel Klepak, he's our guest tonight, feel free to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346, or feel free to email us during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So Joel, would you say that you're sort of your work in dealing with college campuses and all of the diversity that you're seeing there, in terms of different learning styles and different struggles that kids bring to the table, would you say that you've sort of shifted away from these things sort of being a disability and shifted more toward seeing, okay, how do we help adapt you in certain circumstances where you're going to thrive, and you start to see it, so, okay, this is just a difference in you, but here is where I think you'll thrive. I mean, just where you're talking about finding the right major. That's such an interesting look at it too. And, maybe pairing up with the detail person here, even in group projects, looking at what your role is going to be. Would you say that you're shifting out of the disability lens and more into just a diversity lens and finding the right adaptation for them to thrive lens?
Yeah, with dyslexia, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD, probably the most difficult thing for people with those is the shame.
Right.
So they have a life accumulated shame over feeling different, feeling adults around them being frustrated with them, and just telling them they're just lazy, they're stupid, they're whatever. And so actually that's probably the more difficult thing to work through, is the shame of all the shaming that people have done to people who have a different learning style or different kind of brain. And so my first step in working with somebody, I love to just begin to introduce them to some of the strengths. And it doesn't erase all the struggles, but I like for them to start to see that it has a positive side, that it's not all just because you were frustrating to adults in your life doesn't make you a bad person, right? And so, like, for someone with ADHD, like they've grown up being told all the time that they're easily distracted. Well, another way to say easily distracted is that they're curious.
Right.
Right?
Right.
They've been always told they're forgetful. But forgetful also means engaged in the moment. Some of my best friends have ADHD, and we rarely talk. They don't necessarily think to call, but when we're together, they are so fully present.
Right.
We connect more in 3 hours than we would in 3 years. So there's something beautiful about that ability to just be so deeply present in the moment. Someone with ADHD, maybe they can't stay on the point, but they also see things other people miss. They're scanning for the outliers, for those kind of things. Somebody's
Joel,
hyperact. Go ahead.
Would you say that your faith has developed that frame that you are looking through?
I would say it is certainly kind of energized it. I mean, I do just believe that that God has made us beautiful, and even these ADHD and other mental health disorders, in some ways they're really helping us survive difficult things, right? So I see that beautiful, like that drive to grow, and I believe that it's this call to theosis that is in all of our DNA, that there is something in us that won't set down, that won't just hide, that it's this thing in us that wants to grow and become all that God made us to be. So yeah, I mean, I think seeing that the image of God is in everybody, and even the most traumatized, the most hurt people, the image of God is there, and we can see these beautiful signs. When I worked with boys who were living on the street in Romania, I was just amazed sometimes at just the beauty of their love and care for each other. I mean, there was so much just abuse and trauma and this stuff that happened to them that led them to be on the street and addicted. But they were able to sit with each other in pain and hardship and loss in a way that I didn't see very much back in the United States. There's still that image of God, that beauty, that love, that it's there regardless.
Well, I think you take you have a great frame that you're looking through, and I think that is supportive to anyone listening who has a different learning style, who has been, because I think you're right, the shame involved and the devaluing of who I am, the insecurity, the doubt, I'm not capable. That's something that I hear a lot of kids share with me. It is sort of a doubt in their ability to be successful. Their own agency of control is just so shattered, or has been shattered through the school system and through interactions with, as you're saying, adults who have not had that frame of reference as they're looking through. Even kindergartners, I'll hear parents tell me, within the first 2 months of their child being in kindergarten, they're receiving phone calls from the teacher. Well, has your child been evaluated? They're not sitting still. Basically, they're not fitting the mold. And they're becoming the difficult person in the periphery of the room that's causing problems, and you need to kind of go get this kid help because it's he or she is becoming a distraction. And so from the beginning, this sort of narrative starts around the child who learns differently. And so, I was sort of curious about your frame of reference and how you developed it, because I think if everybody could sort of begin, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a friend of a parent, and you're sort of involved at these earlier stages, how we could change the narrative for these kids, I think, would be helpful to just have that frame of, hey, that's curiosity. Hey, that's big picture thinking. Hey, that's the ability to be super engaged and present. And that's powerful, because the word spoken over us, as you well know, so much shapes our identity and the paths that we end up taking.
I was going to add to what you were sharing too, Roxanne, that, and so many of those young people, these formative years that are really developing their character or how they see themselves are being shaped in those times. And, one of the things that, as a child, you never want to have someone make fun of you physically or some sort of physical attribute that you have, or for that matter, some sort of mental thing. To be called dumb or to be called not bright or all these other things, they cut you so much more. And those are things that kind of like stain on your soul that last for such a long time. And I think that's as we were talking about at the top of the show, and Joel, I know you were echoing this in your most recent response, is that it's these labels that we're carrying that if we had just a better understanding of what's actually happening within their minds and being able to utilize those strengths that they do have for good, so that it's not looked at as some sort of a deficit or something that they're lacking, but rather just a different way of approaching something.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I will bring in Gabor Mate, who's written a book called Scattered Minds a few years back. And he would argue that attention deficit disorder may be partly that that the caregivers, that the parents, that the adults struggled to be able to give these kids the attention that they needed when they needed it. And so his theory is that actually attention deficit disorder is actually a coming out of a depravity and seeking attention, seeking stimulus.
Wow.
And so even as a small infant or a small child, there was not enough of that. And I like that he also differentiates the parent and the parenting, because as parents, we love our kids. We do anything for our kids. But sometimes we're distracted.
Right.
Sometimes we go through such a stressful time in life, or work is just hitting us hard, or there's a death in the family, or there's whatever. And all of a sudden it's really a struggle to be emotionally attuned to our kids. And so I think Gabor Mate kind of brings in this long-term perspective in responding to ADHD, which really is, how can we attune deeper to the kid? How can we understand, whether it's a kid or an adult, how can we understand more deeply what's going on and what's needed, rather than just being irritated and frustrated and calling them the problem? And I like this perspective because it really says we are human persons made in the image of God in community with one another. And we are made and formed in community with one another. And actually, our attention, our attunement to our children helps form them to be the people that they become. And the other beautiful thing for me is that healing can happen at any time in our life.
Right.
There was a great family therapist who said, we're really just shooting for good enough parenting. We don't have to be perfect parents. But honestly, there's times when I've not been the attuned, attentive parent that I want to be. And it doesn't say anything about my love for my kids. But, right. I have a hunch that years from now, we'll find that attention deficit disorder maybe has more to do with the parents giving our attention to our phones or our social media, rather than the social media being the thing that creates this in our kids.
Speaking of parents, I mean, Joel, I imagine there's many, many parents listening to this very podcast who may have a child who struggles. And I think it's a common sort of space to exist in, where I don't know how to best support this sort of need for stimulation. What are some tips you would put out to parents who have kids who are struggling, in terms of knowing how to support their abilities to sort of maybe even use their strengths to circumvent those common challenges they see their kids struggling with, but how to meet them in that space so that that child is not seeking for an attention that they're not, receiving?
Yeah, I love that question. I wish I had one answer that worked for everybody. And maybe the closest thing to that is learning how to just sit with and listen more deeply, trying to be more emotionally attuned to our kid, because every kid has different needs and different preferences, and not every ADHD kid is the same. So just including them in that. I love Philip Mamilakis's book on parenting toward the kingdom. And he names in there that we as parents need to really notice, what is our struggle in being present to our kid the way we need to be, and then naming what is our kid's struggle. And so this is really this asceticism of parenting. And what is blocking me from being fully present? And a lot of times what we find is kids with neurodiversity or ADHD often have parents who had it too. And sometimes maybe dad had dyslexia and he was bullied as a kid, and he really doesn't want his kid to be bullied, so he really pushes his kid and ends up kind of bullying his kid to protect him from being bullied, right? So that's something that dad needs to work on his own stuff, so that he can really attune and be present to know what is actually going on with this kid in this time, in this place, in this grade, that is going to help them. And then we can start to figure out, I noticed, when you go play basketball for a half hour after school, you're able to sit and do your homework for 30 minutes.
So sort of observing what really helps and what works, rather than, getting caught up in, I think what I see a lot in practice is the fighting over the continuous snagging of, did you turn it in? Did you turn it in? Did you turn it in? Did you put it in the right place? And it's this, I got it. And then at the end of the moment, they don't turn it in. Right. And so then it's this perpetual struggle. And I think it creates a lot of fighting, and negativity, and then the shame comes, right? So in addition to sort of the being present and attuning, what do you recommend around the challenges that create some of the fighting with parents to kids and wanting to support them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think part of the perspective that is helpful is just seeing both that, there's an assignment that needs to be turned in tomorrow, and there's like a long-term relationship here, a long-term solution. What's the long-term is like, how can we help this kid feel supported, connected with, seen, heard, and see that they matter, see that even doing things differently doesn't make them less of a person, and how can we help them get this paper turned in? So I recently had a student who she met all the criteria for ADHD, but she didn't have any of the academic problems that you would expect. And I just got curious about it and asked, like, how did you figure out how to get assignments done or organize your time? And she was like, well, we had this family calendar on the refrigerator, and our whole family used it all the time. And that's just what I learned how to do. And it helped keep my life organized, So things like that, like there are ways to do it, but when we kind of make it an argument instead of a collaborative thing, then it becomes more destructive, and then you can kind of get the kid reacting in a way that all of a sudden we can't solve the problem. So, a hard thing is sometimes the kids have been shamed so much, they're having strong reactions. It's better to be angry and punch the wall than it is to feel stupid. That's what they might think, exactly. Right? Yeah, so right. And so how can we just be present with, I see you're really struggling right now. Is there a way that we can work together to figure out how to get this thing done? Where are you getting hung up?
And it's never too late to start this. Right. I mean, I know, I'm sure a lot of parents are going, oh man, that's not the thing I've said the last, 8 years, but listen, it's never too late to start. We did receive a question that just came in. It says, thank you for helping me organize my lesson for tomorrow. I will ask students to partner according to big picture versus small detail thinkers. Comment that I want to get a PhD in ADHD. Studied it in college, and I prefer to frame it as a neurodivergent way of thinking amidst other neurodivergent ways of thinking. I feel that my ADHD allows me to perceive and receive God's grace. So I guess that's a comment there. Really focusing in on how much you're sort of helping her bring in, the synergy of how these kids can better work in community with others, and really the benefit. And again, coming back to, the benefit and the strength side of ADHD.
Joel, I think one of the things I would love to kind of get your thoughts on is, as educators, what are some things that you would say that we need to be doing more of, especially in the primary and secondary schools and grades, that we may not be doing now with regards to ADHD? Because I think so much is kind of given, I want to be very respectful about this, but sometimes we tend to just kind of pigeonhole every child that we see as as someone that's maybe disruptive or not able to sit still or unable to grasp the material as having some sort of learning disability. We kind of pigeonhole them, and then unfortunately we communicate with the parents, and they end up getting on medicine. But and I get the medical part of it, obviously. But I guess the bigger question is what can, as educators, what are the things that we should be doing more of that we're not doing right now?
Yeah, I love that question. One of the things just with that we're learning is that that nobody actually has a normal learning profile. Like we've kind of modeled our schools and our education after what we think of as the normal way people learn. And there's a great TED Talk called The Myth of the Normal, and it describes how I think the Air Force spent billions of dollars trying to design a better cockpit to be able to be more efficient. And it ended up not improving outcomes at all. And then what they did was they figured out they need to, because they were sort of deciding who could be a pilot based on whether their body fit in the cockpit right. So they figured out that if we make the cockpit adjustable, then we can actually select people based on their abilities. And so this idea of the adjustable cockpit is kind of brought into education. We can think about, what does it mean to have multiple ways of getting information in, multiple ways of showing what you know, and then also fostering that attention and memory. So input, output, attention, and memory are kind of the pieces, building blocks of education. And so actually anything we do that's teaching, we can do it in multiple ways. And I just love that the Orthodox Church really does that. And in some ways is so far ahead, right? We have this full sensory experience of the liturgy, of the theology. You can be somebody who loves to read deep theology. You can also be someone who shows up and says the Jesus prayer and learns how to move from the head into the heart. You know, there's many ways that we can learn to experience the presence of God. But when we're teaching, like just something as simple as offering 2 or 3 ways for the input, for the content to get in. Nowadays, like we can watch a video or we can listen to it, we can hear a lecture, maybe we can have a discussion about it. You know, there's 4 ways now, right? And so people can kind of self-select which one of those ways works for them. And what we find is that we call this universal design for learning. It's kind of based on the idea of universal design for architecture, where how can we build things so that anybody can get in a building? And so it's the same kind of thing with education. So we don't have to like reduce our educational goals. All we do is we offer multiple ways to get the information, multiple ways to show what you know. It's really heartbreaking for me when I've seen students who I know that they know the material sometimes better than their teacher because that particular subject just caused them to go into a deep dive, right? But their ability to write this paper in the certain way to show what they knew wasn't happening, right? And so the test was really not a good measure of the learning. And so if your outcome you're looking for is somebody that knows how to write a good paper, you make that the goal and you figure out 3 ways to help them do that, right? So
I love that. Joel, I just want to give our listeners an opportunity to call in if they have a question. You're listening to Live with the Louhs tonight. We're speaking with Joel Klepak, and the title of tonight's show is Celebrating and Supporting ADHD Members of Our Families and Churches. We hope that you're enjoying this show. It's such a powerful show and love the information that you're sharing with us, Joel. If you have a question for Joel, feel free to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or feel free to email us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. I know many of you, and Roxanne's going to get to them, are leaving comments in our YouTube, on Ancient Faith's YouTube page. So we are going to get to some of those in just a few moments, but I do want to encourage you, if you would like to talk to Joel, feel free, and you may want to remain anonymous, and we totally respect and honor those wishes. You can totally just let our producer, Matushka Trudy, know that, and she'll make sure that when we have you online.
So I want to jump into some of these wonderful questions. And clearly this is such an important topic. I mean, it's just picking up. We're getting questions faster than we get into them. But this one, I think in particular, I've seen as a bit of a theme coming up amongst a lot of different people, both in YouTube and in email that are coming in. And Joel, how can you discern when it's sin versus disability? And this is, I would refer, another writer says, what about the specific instances where you lack emotion regulation with ADHD, when someone has huge emotional outbursts due to the structure of their brain? Is this sin? Is this disability? I've also heard people say, I actually had someone once tell me, I don't go to church because I have ADHD. I said, help me understand. They said, because I'm just so distracted when I'm in church, I feel it's a sin. I'm not paying attention. And so, I would love for you to speak into this because I see it as a theme that a lot of people are curious about.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that our liturgy even says, let us attend. Right? And so I guess my quick answer is just, sure, it's sin, right? But we're all in a path of theosis, right? And we're all going from somewhere to somewhere. And so I think we need to go to confession. We need to repent of our sin. And then the next problem is like, okay, so how do we work on doing something different? How do we work to be able to pay more attention, right? And so somebody who is really struggling with attention, they may need some more spiritual direction. They may need to do some of their own mental health counseling work as well, because in some ways, like the inability to pay attention, often I find probably 80 or 90% of my clients that have ADHD also have fairly significant trauma. And so there's a lot of at least adverse childhood experiences or trauma that's back there. And so someone who's not paying attention to the liturgy or to God may also be struggling with an effect from trauma that says, you need to be really worried about what everybody in this room is thinking about you right now. Because somebody might be harmful, somebody might hurt you, somebody might shame you, right? And so, yeah, it may be sin not to pay attention, but let's also work on healing the places that are like trying to like keep them safe by distracting them from the liturgy, right? And so that's just a very specific example, but I want to get to the deeper pieces of it. Like we can confess our sin, and how many times do we like confess our sin, but things don't change, right?
Right.
So sometimes, I mean, I think that's where we need to start, right? If this is willful, conscious sin, let's confess it. Let's move on. Let's repent, right? But when that's not working, let's go deeper. Let's figure out what else is there. And what I find is that usually what else is there is also something like, I need to feel safe. I need to belong. And these are strategies for getting that safety or belonging or community or whatever that maybe aren't very healthy, right? So like, I'll just give people pleasing as an example. Right? It's one of the things we really like a lot. We like people pleasers in a sense, right? But often when we're people pleasing, we're really afraid that people won't like me. And then maybe I won't belong. Maybe I won't be connected. But if I'm people pleasing so much that people don't see authenticity, then they don't feel closeness with me. And then I don't feel a sense of belonging, right? And so often these strategies for getting our relational needs met, our safety needs met, end up hijacking our ability to actually get that, so.
And specifically with the emotional outbursts too. I mean, I think that, again, potentially these are learned patterns. What I hear you saying could be a result of not having the words or tools to have maneuvered all of those strong feelings, maneuvered through them healthfully as a child, and there was a lot coming at me. There's a lot happening within me, didn't know how to work through, and this sort of became the way. And, I think what I hear you saying is don't judge it, notice it, and let's figure out what helps. Let's start where we are. and figure out what tools we need to engage or to manage those outbursts, because everyone's starting somewhere. And pursuing that same path to theosis, whether you're dealing with ADHD or anything else. Everybody is sitting in church sinning differently.
That's right.
I want to get to this. I want to this question too, Roxanne. Joel, this question actually comes from listeners that we have in Australia. This was the email question. It said, unfortunately, identifying the symptoms are like astrology in that everything seems to apply. I've been trying to work out how to navigate treating my young adult son with all these characteristics, as he unfortunately reminds me so much of myself. Focusing on the positives is a revelation. Would you kindly expand on the positives I could adopt? Joel?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few more that I didn't mention, but like disorganized is also spontaneous. Stubborn. We can also often get criticized for being stubborn, but that's also persistence, right? How many of our saints were stubborn, right? They were persistent, know, and that inconsistency can be showing flashes of brilliance. The other side of it, I would say, and this applies to a lot of parenting situations, is if we can shift from seeing our kids as either doing things right or wrong and shift into seeing like they're in a developmental struggle. Like as Philip Mamalakis says, they're in the ascetic struggle of growing and learning, right? And so if we can see like, how can we support their process from where they're at? Like, yeah, maybe kids younger than them are less impulsive, but that doesn't really matter. What does your impulsive kid need to kind of help them? And like if they're struggling with outbursts, often we're looking at how to contain that behavior. But I want to look at like part of that is that outburst is a need to be seen, a need to be heard. And we can contain the behavior, and then the heart of this kid is still not feeling seen and heard. And so what we want to do is figure out like, okay, how can we I want to help you figure out a way to express that anger, that frustration in a different way. And I want to make sure I really understand what you've been angry and frustrated about and really take you serious. And that's a way that we can show our kid that they really matter. Because even if they're expressing what they need to in a terrible way, they're still trying to express something meaningful and important. And so just focusing on behavior really misses the heart of this person, this human person who's in a little body still probably, but there's still a human person that has this beautiful spirit and heart that longs to be seen and heard. And when we don't feel like we're getting that, we need that communion so bad, we will break the rules and get people's attention, right? So how can we kind of sometimes like get out of the situation, wait till a little bit later, but then like, I noticed you had that outburst and I didn't love the way you did that, but I'm wondering what is underneath that. What were you feeling like that made you so angry?
I love that. And we have several more questions that have just come in, Joel. I'm going to move to one that just came in via email. It says, I am a mother. I was diagnosed with ADHD and OCD as an adult. I'm a mother with 3 boys, one including a toddler with special needs. I've been told I am very curious my whole life. I never felt very intelligent because of how I process information. I do have a creative streak, which I'm thankful for. So now my life is that I'm a homeschooler and homeschooling teacher to my children. We get to learn a lot together, but I struggle with tasks, staying focused and obsessing. My kids see all of this and I can't hide it. I've dealt with second guessing myself my whole life, and now all of it makes sense as to why. What can I do to lessen these symptoms? I want to do everything and get so excited about new things, but my impulsivity becomes a problem. I also become overstimulated and I just become irritated with my kids. It hurts them and I am trying my best to be attentive as I can. Thank you for reading. So let's go to that. What could she be doing to lessen the symptoms and help her navigate the impulsivity and the irritation that she's said that is surfacing.
Yeah, I just really feel a lot of compassion for that. Being a parent myself, I know it can be overwhelming, and we homeschool our kids as well, and I'm really aware of how overwhelming all that can be, and there's a lot of demand to organize all the time and education of these little people, right? So I would say the first thing is to work on just deepening this understanding that because your brain works a little bit differently, because you struggle with impulsivity in these things, it does not make you a bad person. You're made in the image of God. You have strengths and weaknesses that come with these things, and being impulsive is not everything, right? It's your particular struggle, but it's not everything, and it doesn't really say who you are as a person. And I even like to think of, our ascetic tradition says we kind of move from our head to this heart space, to this almost like the temple of the Holy Spirit, this place where we move into the heart, where we commune with God. And all this neurodiversity and mental health struggles are up here. They're in our head, they're in our emotions. But this heart space is this beautiful, untouched area that is this place where we commune with God. So I would just say, like, if you can work on learning to sort of know that God loves you as you are, remove some of that shame. And sometimes it takes some counseling for that. But also, how can you find some places of support, places where you can complain about your kids without your kids hearing you, where you can talk about how hard it is and get some support around that. Find other like homeschool families and figure out how they organize things. I don't naturally know how to organize things. My wife is amazing at it. She told me once, if you write your friend's birthday on the calendar, the day will come around and you'll remember it, and then you can call them. Well, I did that with one of my friends, and I called him on his birthday, and he said, "Joel, what are you doing?" How did you know it was my birthday?
I'm following my wife's directions.
It was too weird. I never did it again. But I just, like, even as someone who's not great at organization, I welcome that. I love that. I long for that. So you don't have to be good at it. You can steal from other people, right? Just take a survey of all the, 10 or 12 other homeschool families and ask how they organize things. How do they schedule things? We have a 3-month calendar on our refrigerator, and that's the only way that our family life works.
Right.
Without that 3-month calendar, we're sunk. But that's all my wife's figuring that out. Like I don't come with those organizational skills, but we can learn those. So that's about like moderating your weaknesses. Just knowing this is a weakness doesn't make you a bad person. Now we can just problem solve. How do we fill in those gaps?
I love that. I think
executive
so
functioning, organization. Yeah.
I know that's how I think we operate so great, Roxanne. So.
Yes. God knew what he was doing when he paired us together, I'm thinking.
Without a doubt. Joel, we have a few more minutes left in our show. I can't believe it's going by this fast, but we're still getting continual comments and on our YouTube channel and on through email. But I did have this question to ask you. Being a therapist in a college setting, what do you see as key factors in parenting that contribute or hinder emerging adults? What would a parent of a college student, what would you tell them, or an adolescent on the way to college? What are some things that we can do to hinder our children?
Yeah, so it is an interesting position to be in, because I kind of see these young people right after the 18 years of parenting. And there's some themes that come up, things that they got stuck on, things that were really deeply hurtful to them. And, some of the things that I've noticed is just that, like, being listened to deeply is so important, like I've been saying. That emotional And I would say like emotional attunement is not agreement. We don't have to agree with our kids. You know, they come up with all these crazy ideas sometimes, but attuning to them and trying to understand them deeply doesn't mean we agree with them. Also, emotional attunement doesn't mean you have to pick up on your kids' emotions, or if they're angry, become angry. If they're anxious, become anxious. We can attune to them and still maintain kind of a little bit of emotional separation so that we can know, like, no, I'm grounded in my relationships, in my relationship with God. My kid can be anxious. I don't have to be. Okay, so we can be emotionally attuned without that. And I would say, like, forgiving yourself as a parent too. When we get so stuck on being a good parent, sometimes it makes it harder to be a good parent. It's everything we do is not really about us, or everything our kid does isn't necessarily about us. Sometimes it's just their growth and development. And I think just this also, I would just encourage parents to really project and speak availability. It's really sad to hear students say, like, that they really felt like their parents were not wanting to be with them, or not wanting, you know, and I worry about when I'm on my phone and my kids see me on my phone, that, you know, it may seem real important, but they're seeing me with this barrier between them and me. And my kid is thinking, do I interrupt dad or not? You know, so how can we, like, project availability? I'm here, I'm ready. Especially with teenagers, you know, like we say, like with teenagers, it's either like the door's all the way shut, or it's like a garage door and it's all ready to come out, you know? If we're not ready to hear our kids when they're ready to talk, especially teenagers, you may not hear it.
That's it. And interestingly, I feel like if we're on our computer, even if they do or are willing to interrupt us, if we're on the computer, we're only listening well enough to say, aha. We're not listening well enough to ask a curious question, or to follow it, or to understand something because of it, or link it to something else and actually deepen that conversation. It's just enough to say, aha, yeah, me too. Right. And so it kind of like ends. And I wanted to just capitalize on something you said a minute ago, because, you know, the emotional attunement and also being separate enough from an emotional outburst in a child, I don't know if listeners picked up on that, but that is so crucial, that we can attune to and have compassion for and understand what is happening in our child without taking on that angst. Because so often what I see is kid gets anxious, kid has an emotional outburst, and parent feels anxious, emotional stuff boiling, and then it becomes this sort of fire. And we can only best support somebody in an emotional struggle if we exist enough on the outside of it to be their grounding. You know, what kids need when they're melting down is our calm. They need to borrow our grounding. They need to borrow our calm. And when we attune so much that we can't separate from it, we have nothing to lend them. And so I just wanted to sort of echo that, because I thought that was just so powerful, and I don't want anyone to like miss that or gloss over, because you said it, and but it was super important as so much of what you have shared tonight.
I think that's, you know, for me, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joel. I wanted to give you the
I was just going to say that I feel like the liturgy also, for me personally, really grounds me. Like even my therapy work and my parenting, like that, being in the liturgy, like helps me sit in the big picture of God's plan, God's kind of love over all of the universe, right? And I'm just one little piece in that, and God's bigger than my ability to parent, bigger than my knowledge, bigger than me knowing everything. I don't have to know everything. I'm part of this. That's one of the beauties of Ocamper too, is there's really, we do the anointing of hands with oil for healing, and that we are part of the church, you know, as we're parenting, as we're doing therapy. So,
well, let me ask you this, Joel. Just that we've got I know this is putting you on the spot, but we only have about a minute or two left. But I did, want to ask, for parents, oftentimes when they're in church, trying to, sometimes they're trying so much to make sure that their children don't move and that they're just sitting still. I can remember my mom doing the same thing for me. Nick, stop moving. God's watching. And, but, just kind of like, how would you recommend to a parent that's here that, sometimes it's hard for them to kind of stay focused? I mean, it's an hour and a half, service. It's, but how do you keep that? Because I find having children in church to me is absolutely beautiful. I think that's a sign of a church is having every demographic that you have within a life to be there and present. But I think for a lot of people that just that uncomfortability of having them there. What would you give some advice to the parents that may be listening here who have that concern?
I mean, for me, like the more your kids are used to coming to church regularly, the more they kind of learn what's okay and what's not okay. But I feel like somebody should sit at the back of the church, and when everybody's leaving, all the parents of small kids should get like little blue ribbons. You made it. You got through this, right? And I know when my kids were small, it was like I lived for that like 30 seconds when they were still and they were quiet and I could just be present in the liturgy, right? And that's what you get, right? Mm-hmm. But it's so valuable that they are full members of the kingdom. They're
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joel, I want to thank you. I know Roxanne and I are just so grateful, first of all, to get to know you. And we definitely would love to have you come back on the show because I think...
there's a lot more to ask. Yeah. We didn't even get to half the questions actually we were going to ask you. And I did just want to put a shout out there to Ocamper that Ocamper does have, you were mentioning right before the show that they have a disability session, that symposium that took place in the last conference. Can you tell our listeners where to find it?
Look for the Ocamper YouTube channel.
And that's OCAMPR for our listeners.
That's right, .org. And if you look that up on the YouTube channel, you'll find the new list of all the 2023 offerings. And there's actually two. Summer Kennard does one on autism spectrum disorder and the church. Beautiful, deep theological exploration of autism spectrum disorder and the church. And actually, she has a lot of really nice, practical ways of kind of helping people on the autism spectrum engage in the church. And then there was a panel on disability in the church as well. And there was a blind student from St. Vladimir's who was part of that, and Kate McRae and Summer Kennard were on that as well. Just beautiful. Yes. How can we make the church ready for everybody?
Right. I think that's such great information. And again, that's Ocamper, OCAMPR.org. And definitely look out for their YouTube channel. But again, to you, Joel, thank you so much. Please give our love to the family. And we look forward to having you on the show in the very near future.
Thank you for having me, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us on this Tuesday evening. As we mentioned at the top of the show, stay joined to us. We are on all the social media platforms. If you've got questions, even regarding to this show, that we can definitely send to Joel afterwards, we'd love to do that. You can, through our website, thelouhs.com, there's a way to email us questions that you may have, but also just to find out all the different shows that we've done in the past. And also, if you'd like to receive our daily inspirational messages, go to our website again and just click on that subscribe button, simply put in your email address, and tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. you'll get Thursday, or actually Wednesday's inspirational message. So definitely take advantage of that. And friends, as we say every single Tuesday, God bless you all and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.